My name is Mark, I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the 9 o'clock guest speaker meeting. We just started with a moment of silence to remember the still suffering alcoholic both inside and outside the rooms. Thank you. Preamble of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. I just wanted to start off the meeting with a reading that comes from the appendix of our big book, and it was referenced yesterday when I started reading the big book. I thought you started at page 1 and that was it, and the Roman numerals is important. And then there's a passage that's referenced a number of times in the early chapters, and it's got an asterisk at the bottom of the page, spiritual experience, and I used to just gloss over it. And my sponsor said, it must be quite important if they remind you again and again and again to look at it, but I knew everything, so I didn't think it was important. But it goes along the lines of, and part of it reads, among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. There is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance, and that principle is contempt, pride, and investigation. We have two speakers this morning. Our first speaker from the Village Group in Sydney is Jody.
You've got the timer going, thank you. Hi friends, I'm Jody, I'm an alcoholic. I was going to say that I wasn't Marco asked me yesterday about speaking today, and I'm a bit shy about speaking these days, but I don't want to go on about it too long because I know Matthew will have a go at me. But yeah, so I am an alcoholic. Drugs are a big part of my story. I use them to control my drinking. I got sober in my sober date is the 22nd of June 1996, which makes me 28 years clean and sober. I got sober at the ripe old age of 24, and I thought I was very young when I got here. There's a lot younger people I've seen since then, but I felt very young. And I certainly was not happy to be here. Those of you who are in your early days and maybe in your early 20s, I felt ripped off. I thought I should have got at least another 10 or 15 years of having a good time. And I knew from my very first meeting when I got here that my drinking was screwed, basically. I strongly identified from my first meeting. I walked in and I saw the steps on the wall, and I knew I was powerless over alcohol. I didn't think my life was unmanageable, but I knew I was powerless over alcohol. I'd been trying to control my drinking for at least 8 or 9 years. I'd been to controlled drinking programs, I'd done lots of things. I grew up in a really, my family is riddled with the disease of alcoholism and addiction, and that's not to say that I had a particularly traumatic or obviously violent or abusive childhood, but I was the white sheep in the family. I'm the only one that's ended up in AA. People had been to jail, and there was lots of drug addiction in my family and lots of mental health problems as well. And so, I seemed like the functional academic member of the family. I did really well at school, went to schools for gifted and talented kids, and went to a selective high school, and I came 62nd in the state in a mathematics competition when I was 13, and I say all that just to let you know that it's not about being clever, and it's not about how much knowledge I have, because I have this horrible spiritual malady that can take us out. And so I grew up in that family. I was sharing with someone yesterday who hasn't heard my story that there was a lot of drug taking in my family. Alcohol was not cool. My grandmother was an alcoholic, and she was quite aggressive and hostile. The sort of generation one up from me, like my grandparents' generation, they all got really drunk and beat each other up at family get-togethers. My mum's younger sister had her 21st, and the venue that they were having the 21st at they were very worried about all the young people, but it was the 60-year-olds that broke and smashed the glasses and started fighting and glassing each other. And all the 21-year-olds were all taking ecstasy and having a great time. So the environment that, I also share with people that my mum's brother got everyone to have ecstasy at Christmas one year, and it was a really weird Christmas. My grandparents participated as well, and so my drinking and drug taking did not stand out in my family. I was not, but I knew that there was something wrong, because from the time I picked up a drink at 13, and I picked up hash before that, I just didn't drink like other people. I thought I was drinking like other people, but I was a blackout drinker from the beginning. Not every time I drank, but it was consistently part of my drinking story that I would drink to blackout, even from a young age. I had alcohol poisoning for the first time when I was 13 because I drank a bottle and a half of sweet sherry. I just didn't have that off switch that we're all familiar with, or not familiar with, as the case may be. And I had, I would wake up the next morning and I could never just shrug it off. My friends would say, "Oh well, whatever," and I was consumed with guilt, remorse, and shame, even if I hadn't really done anything that bad. I just knew I think it was on some deep spiritual level, I knew that there was something wrong with the way I drank and took drugs. And so, it started out with alcohol. As I got more mature, I introduced drugs to the mix, and it was basically so I wouldn't go into blackout quite so early in the night. I had a family member who was a drug dealer, so I had access to good drugs, and they were cheap, and it was mostly cocaine, and I used, and sometimes speed if I was a bit short of money, and I used to use drugs to keep the party going longer. And so, you know, I got through high school. My mum ended up in Al-Anon after I got sober. But I got through high school primarily and got into university primarily because my mum controlled my drinking until I was 18. I spent a lot of time grounded, and she was hardcore with the grounding. And when I got to finish high school, she said to me, "Look, you're an adult now, you're legally allowed to drink, I can't keep grounding you for going out and getting drunk." And I took off, you know, and I went to uni. I didn't get into the degree I wanted to get into. I ended up doing chemical engineering because I was also a feminist, and I thought that chemical engineering sounded like a cool feminist thing to do. I majored in alcoholism. And in case you're wondering, they don't offer that as a major in chemical engineering at the University of New South Wales. And I failed 6 out of 7 subjects in my first year at uni, and the one I passed was engineering drawing, and it was because I cheated and copied someone else's assignment. And anyway, of course, the decision I made at that point was, yeah, you know what, chemical engineering is not for me. And I left university. I forgot to tell them I was leaving, so they weren't real happy when I tried to come back after I got sober. But I left uni. I got a full-time job in the pub I was working at. It was a pretty rough pub. It was near the airport in Sydney, and it's actually quite gentrified now, but in 1991 it wasn't. It was, they had a sign out the front the day that I went for my job interview that said "Miss Mood, New South Wales appears here Thursday." And fortunately it was the only time that Miss Mood, New South Wales appeared there. And I wasn't asked to take my clothes off, but it wasn't a very salubrious place. And I fitted right in there because people, you know, my drinking did not look out of place there. People were waiting. It was an early opener. People were waiting outside the door at 6:30 in the morning to have their first schooner and their first rum of the day. And my drinking and cocaine snorting did not look like, it was quite very unusual compared to those drinkers. And so I worked there for a while. The disease was progressing in me, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I developed a raging gambling problem as well. And I started playing the poker machines because I got bored at work. My financial unmanageability was going downhill really fast. And I owed lots of money, not to Mr. Big, fortunately, just to credit cards and all sorts of unmanageable debt. And then, you know, one day my mum's second marriage was falling apart, and they separated, and my mum decided that my mum was a hippie, and she wanted to do the eat, pray, love thing, and she was going off to the Himalayas and to travel the world. And she was very concerned about leaving her very unmanageable daughter at home to look after everything, and suggested that I go and see a drug and alcohol counsellor before she went, because she thought I had a drinking problem. And I don't think either of us knew much about alcoholism, except that there was lots of people in our family that shouldn't drink. And I went off and saw him, and he explained to me that I hadn't learned how to drink properly. And I was like, yes. Because I was really good at learning how to do things. I was clever. And I thought that sounded really cool, that someone could teach me how to drink properly. And so I did this controlled drinking program, and I had this whole process. It was a 5-week course. I had to sit and listen to a relaxation tape. It's so ironic that I listen to speakers' tapes these days, but this was like a half-hour meditation, guided meditation about visualising myself with a glass of Chardonnay and then having a sip of mineral water. And I listened to it for 30 minutes a day and obsess about alcohol. And it was just, I don't know who came up with the idea, but geez, I'd love to give them some feedback about the research study I was involved in. and I had to keep a drinking diary and, you know, all this stuff that just didn't work, you know. But I didn't know at the time that I was powerless over alcohol and that I had a mental obsession and a spiritual malady that would lead me to continue to drink if I had that first drink. And more geographicals with my job, ended up working with my family, in my family business with all the alcoholics and the addicts. And one day my grandfather had a stroke and I was very close to him and I was moving in with him and I had had a big party to say farewell to my apartment that I was living in Bondi, and I had all the things laid out. I'd been to a wine tasting, so I had 2 cases of wine in the house. I had 3 pre-rolled joints because I always drank less when I smoked pot. My mum was staying with me, always drank less when she was around, and we were just having a quiet night at my place to say goodbye to my apartment, and you know, I was going to go to work at 9 o'clock the next morning, and somehow I ended up in the Cross. For those of you who don't know, that's the red light district in Sydney, at 3 o'clock in the morning, dancing with a mirror because all my friends had gone home, and no one wanted to drink with me anymore. And I stumbled out of there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I had that moment that, you know, we've heard people talk about, where I just said, I can't do this anymore. And I went home, I tried to sober up. My mum said to me, Jodie, you know, I thought you were going to say goodbye to your friends and you didn't come back for 6 hours, and I've been worrying about you all night, and I didn't know if you were dead and you got hit by a car or what. And I can't do this anymore. You need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And she doesn't know where she got that from. I don't know where she got it from, but I got that phone book out, and it was a Yellow Pages, and I rang them, and they told me that there was an AA meeting around the corner, and it just so happened, so I was at work, feeling really under the weather with my grandfather who just had a stroke, and running our piano shop, and they told me this meeting was around the corner. The shop closed at 4 and the meeting was at 5, and it was literally like 500 metres walk from the shop. And I walked down the road and up the street, had a little spew in the gutter on the way in. Nerves, hungover, you know, combination of all of those things. It's a really nice neighbourhood, so spewing in the gutter is not really a very good look. But I walked up to the door, and there was this really attractive woman at the door who I immediately recognised. She was quite famous and a model, and she was about 21, and she put her hand out and she said, I'm blah blah and I'm an alcoholic, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was just like, my mind was blown. I was expecting a room full of old men in grey overcoats who drank at Gilligan's Island, which is where all the homeless people are in Sydney. And this woman's greeting me at the door, and I just was like, wow, if she could be an alcoholic, maybe this is the right place for me. And I walked in with an open mind, and I heard that I was powerless over alcohol, and I heard that 1 drink was too many and 100 was never enough, and I heard that if I didn't have the first drink, I couldn't get drunk. And my whole world and existence changed that day, and I haven't had a drink since that day. It's not my sobriety date. I had a social cocaine and marijuana problem that needed to be honest about, but it was that I do feel like it was the day. I mean, it's the day that my mum says she stopped worrying about me, and that's huge. But I got sober 3 months later. I happened to stumble. I work in treatment now, and I tell this story to people, but I happened to stumble into a home group where everyone was young, everyone was enthusiastic, they were all doing the steps, getting sponsors, doing service commitments, and they were really excited and happy about being sober. And, you know, when I walked into that meeting, gosh, I've done it again. When I walked into that meeting, I was like, my mind was blown, because I was really expecting my life to be over if I was in an AA meeting at 24. And I felt ripped off, like I said. And it was just, I was gobsmacked. that these people were all so happy about being sober, and it was infectious, you know. So, you know, I mean, I say that because if you're around people who aren't really enthusiastic and happy about being here, then find some new friends, because, you know, it's really hard to be like that all the time, and I needed a group of people that could do that for me on the days when I couldn't do it for myself, and when I was in self-pity and self-loathing and full of the guilt, remorse and shame of, you know, being an alcoholic in active addiction and what I'd done to my family. And I didn't really do very much, but I just had this innate sense of guilt that I found it took a long time to get rid of that, the shame of my alcoholism. And I'm grateful to say I'm free of that today. And you know, I'm almost proud to be an alcoholic because I know that I have a solution in recovery, and you know, my kids, so lots of stuff happened. At 4 years sober, I tried to 12-step my dad. He was an alcoholic. He didn't get sober, he committed suicide, and that was a huge time in my recovery. I felt like I'd been completely abandoned by my higher power, and I really, you know, I found it really hard to have any. I didn't pray, I didn't meditate, I didn't have a sponsor at the time. Well, I had one, but I didn't call her, so I call that not having one. And eventually I had another spiritual rock bottom in recovery. We talked about surrenders. I've had quite a few. And I got a new sponsor and I worked the steps again. And I was probably 6 or 7 years sober when that happened. And I've had to do that a number of times in recovery. You know, I couldn't have children. I had to do IVF. I thought God sucked then too. And then, you know, then having kids, I couldn't breast. Like, it was just like it felt like there were so many obstacles along the way. And one of the great things about staying sober long enough is that I can look back on all those things and they don't hold the same pain or the same barbs that they had at the time, and they're all things that I've been able to share with other women in recovery, and men, but men and women in recovery, that, you know, that there is hope and that you can get through that stuff. And yeah, I was just thinking yesterday when Matthew read out that I still cry a lot. Someone told me they were wet prayers, and so I'm running with that. I have done for the last 28 years. Fortunately, it doesn't stop me from speaking. I can talk through them, except when they're snotty ones. But yeah, I was listening to the prayer that Matthew read out yesterday, and one of the biggest things, I suppose, about long-term recovery is continuing to see how sick I am, and I don't mean that in a, you know, flagellation kind of way. I just mean it in a surrendered way, you know, and that I don't have to be any better than I am right now, and that I don't have to, you know. And one of the biggest things I've got, I was quite moved in the Al-Anon AA meeting yesterday. I've got nearly 17, he's 17 in a couple of weeks, son, and a 13-year-old daughter, and neither of them have had a drink or a drug yet. So we're in that limbo zone, just waiting for it to happen, and what that's going to look like, you know. And you know, my husband's in AA as well, so they've got a fairly red-hot chance with a genetic predisposition. But it continues to be a journey for me, for handing my will and my life over to God and trusting in that process. And what long recovery looks like is having so many examples of doing that and it working out okay, even when it didn't work out the way I thought was going to be okay, you know. I have a different prayer that I do with my third step prayer, and I do it with the women I sponsor, and I have a prayer that I do, but when we're going through that third step ceremony, thanks Marco, my husband took me through the big book. That was an ego-deflating experience. But he had what I wanted, so I asked him. And one of the things that he showed me was to write a resignation letter to God. And I was speaking at a convention a little while ago and I read it out, and it was very moving to a lot of people. I don't know if it's the context, and I think I'll just finish off by sharing that with you, if that's okay. It won't take long, I promise. But it's worked for me. I don't know if it's because I'm a working person, but so this is my resignation that I wrote a year ago, going through the steps. So, dear God, I hereby resign my position as CEO of my life. I need glasses now, I'm old. As CEO of my life, effective immediately, and I appoint you as my successor. It's been a hard job controlling my life and trying to see around corners for the last 53 years. Most days I'm proud of the progress I've made with your help, particularly in the last 28 years since I've been sober, and what we've accomplished as a team on behalf of my family and loved ones. But in the interest of everyone's health and happiness, and the health and happiness of my loved ones, because I'm an Al-Anon, I'm convinced that everything will continue to be increasingly successful without the need of my interference and anxiety anymore. As you're well aware, I have lots of desired outcomes around success and financial reward, where I want to be in the future and where I think others need to be, that I definitely think will be best for everyone, but I'm well aware that I don't always know what's best for me and your much bigger plan. I'm fiercely committed and hopefully can surrender to finding a way to let go of my need to control any and all aspects of my life, and for this reason I've decided to resign effective immediately. Please help me to set aside everything I think I know about my life so I can have an open mind and a new experience. Please help me to see the truth about your loving guidance and direction. As always, it's my pleasure working with you. Thank you for the opportunity to fumble along, sometimes in reliance and sometimes in defiance. Love now and forever, your loving servant, Jodie. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jodie. That was wonderful. And now our second speaker from Los Angeles is Matthew.
My name is Matthew. I have alcoholism. Jodie, that was just lovely, Jodie. And, I've been fortunate to know Darren and Jodie for a while. And in AA, you meet these people that I feel in their presence that I can be completely myself. And that kind of acceptance is so valuable. So thank you for being my friends. And that was just beautiful. I've been paying attention this weekend. Thank you for everyone that's come up and talked to me and shared your stories with me. And, it's become, I like words a lot. And, the word recover has a couple of meanings. And one of them is to return to normal state of health. So you can see, you get into recovery, you try to return to the normal state of health. But I think the more salient one is regain or possession of something that you lost. And we're in recovery here. I've been on recovery missions and boating things, and I've done things to recover after a workout or running a race. But I look at pictures of myself as a child. I like that show Intervention. Do you guys see that show Intervention out here? One of the interventionists was a friend of mine. And I always would get emotional because I have children when they'd show the pictures of them as children, right? Before they became addicts or alcoholics and started destroying everyone's life on their own. And I really believe what I've regained here is my connection to a higher power that I just took for granted as a child. I don't think God cares if you check in with him when you're connected to him. And as a kid, I just lived a happy life because God provided it for me. So what I decided to speak about today, first of all, I want to pause for a second and point out that I was on the championship tribute team. That's right. And I did this entirely without God. No, actually, the only question we got wrong was the one I got wrong, and it was about my country. So thank you for letting me ride on your coattails. But I wanted to talk about the 11th step today. And it's come to mean so much to me, but I think it also follows very well on the third step that I talked about yesterday. And, I talked about this prayer. So that it says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. And I came to AA with a lot of prejudices about religion. One was I was raised in a Catholic school by what we referred to as the witches of God, which are nuns. And they're very scary people. And And you got to understand, like I grew up in the 70s near the beach where like girls' bathing suits were getting smaller and smaller. And I was taught by nuns who had like, you could only see their faces. And when I was 14, a nun said to me, you know, if you even think about sex, you're going to hell. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to hell, so let's just move on from there. Because I don't know how not to think about it. I'm 14. And then I went and got a degree in English, or a degree in English and a minor in religious studies. And I wasn't trying to get a minor in religious studies. I just went to classes at night that I liked. And my junior year of college, my counselor brought me in and said, you know, if you wanted to get a degree in religious studies, I could have made it easier for you. And I go, oh, I'm not getting a degree in religious studies. And he said, you have one. I said, wow, I just like the classes. I just think I was thirsty. And my family's a weird family. I have a couple of people in my family, my siblings who are geniuses. My brother's a well-respected poet, and he used to give me books when I was like 13 and 14 about different mythologies and stuff. But the whole point of that is that I came to AA and I was fairly obtuse about the whole religion thing, you know. And when it say sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for me, right there I was like, I don't want to know God's will for me. I was taught that God hates me. I don't think they meant to teach me that, but those words came out of their mouth and I absorbed them like, well, I must be bad because I do think about sex. Later I learned I was biologically supposed to. God's like, hey, we need more people. Could you get with it, Matthew? You know, that's our physical being. But I was feeling guilty for being a human being. So when it said, prayed only for knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out, I just didn't like that. But as I went through the steps, things happened and things changed. And that's what I wanted to talk about again today is my experience. First of all, I'll point that out. I didn't think I was going to tell this part, but I went to my sponsor when I was getting some traction and things were changing because of the steps in my life. I said, I don't really understand that prayed only for knowledge of God's will for me. It's a little ambiguous and smoky for me, and I don't like it. And my sponsor, very good man, he doesn't just answer your questions. He thinks, or he gets somebody with experience. And I brought this to him a few times, and when I brought it up like the third or fourth time, he said, you know, I think you just think too much. He said, I think it's more obvious than you think it is. He said, you know, when the alarm clock goes off, I think God wants you to get up. When Phoebe walks by and the air smells a little funny, I think God wants you to change the baby. And if a bill comes in the mail and says, pay this amount, God's leaning over your shoulder going, hey, pay that amount. And he said, God wants you to do the next indicated thing, and then you'll be doing God's will. And it's so funny to me. I got so much relief from that. Like, oh, okay, I can do that. And I did. I got better jobs. I met Kevin last night. I worked hard. And I just did the next indicated thing. And I think about my parents. You know, my parents were lovely people, like really good people. Worked hard, like trying to teach me lessons of life. And my dad's spinning in his grave doing some idiot told you to do the next indicated thing. And you go, oh, that's what you're supposed to do. But that's what happened here. I was crippled. And they said, just do this. And I've heard this around now in AA. I heard this advice 30 years ago. But I heard this around now. They say, do the next right action. That's way too much judgment for me. You know, because I don't know what the right action is. I want to do the next grandiose plan. But the next indicated thing is, you know, stop at the red light. Like, I can do those simple things. But when it came to prayer, and I said this yesterday, this prayer just seems so wimpy to me. You know, and I like to get to the point. I like, okay, I get the gist of this. I like to shortcut things. And it said, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I'd say for like 7 years, I was going, okay, give me the patience to put up with all this bullshit. You know, that's what I thought it said. You know, I can read the serenity to accept the things, the patience to put up with all this. The courage to change the things I can. I mentioned yesterday my formula that I learned in AA for courage. But I never quite figured out what the things I could change were for years until I realized it was me as I was changing. And the wisdom to know the difference. And I'm going to come back to that prayer, hopefully at the end, if I do this the way I thought I was. But I will say, early in recovery, that's the prayer I had. And on my 90-day chip, I was driving home from the meeting, and I had my 90-day chip, and I had a car that didn't have license or registration in it, but there was smoke coming out of my tailpipe because one of my friends had put sugar in my gas tank, and I got pulled over. And I saw these red lights, and I immediately went, God, grant me the serenity to accept the thing, because I got nothing, right? And he pulls me over, and I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at my license, and it had expired a few years ago, but I didn't drive much, and that's so many rules, and I just, so I'm waiting for him to come, and I'm going, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change. And I hand him my license, and he goes, do you have insurance? I'm like, I don't know, maybe. And he went back to his car, and I'm praying this prayer, and he walks up to the side of the car, and he goes, can you step out of the car, please? And I said, hey, man, I got 90 days in Alcoholics Anonymous today. And he goes, oh, that's great. Welcome to your past, Mr. Mitchell. Get out of the car. And I got out of the car, and I'm like, seriously, I'm trying to get my life together. This is my chip. They gave me this chip as a meeting. Like, I thought it was like my get out of jail free card. And he goes, can you put your hands behind your back, please? And he arrested me. So I'm here to tell you, prayer does not work. No. It gets worse. So I get in the back seat of the car, and I'm really trying to babble my way out of this thing. And he drives me, and he goes, you don't understand. I would let you go for the smoking tailpipe. You have multiple warrants for your arrest. And so it's Friday night, I get taken to jail. I'm sitting in jail, and I've heard people in AA go, my best day drinking wasn't as good as my regular day sober. And that's total crap, man. Like, I'll tell you, there are some things that are way better drunk. And jail is one of them. I've been to jail drunk, not so bad. I'll just sit over there, But I'm sober, and this is a time when AIDS was a big deal, and I'm in this bunk, and the guy above me, who had muscles like bigger than my waist, was punching the wall, and blood was coming out of his fist and splattering into my face. And I'm going, God, grant me the serenity to accept these things that I can't change. I just said that prayer over and over. And then on Monday morning, they took me into court and they strapped me up to these guys, and they had orange on, which meant they'd been in county, right? I had the clothes I'd gone to get my chip in on Friday. And I'd have one on either side of me, and they were skinhead, Aryan Nation, white nationalist guys. And they put us in a holding cell, and these guys start talking. They've been in holding cells more than me. And one of them reaches into his underwear and pulls out crack cocaine. And the other guy had a pen with no ink in it and a mess. And they're leaning over me, smoking crack in the holding cell. And I'm going, God, grant me the serenity. And I'm like, well, I got nothing, man. And they're high as a kite. And this is the best part. So my brother, who 12-stepped me, he's 12 years sober at the time, and the mother of my daughter apparently came to court to bail me out. And they walk us out, and I'm chasing these two skinheads, and I look up, and my brother bursts out laughing. and the mother of my daughter starts sobbing. And my brother had posted my bail. And I go, how much was my bail? Because I didn't want to owe my brother. He goes, don't worry about it. You can paint my house. And I go, okay. So I painted his house like every weekend for a long time. He had a pretty big house. And when I got done painting his house, he was sitting in the backyard laughing at me. And I go, why are you laughing? He goes, your bail was $200. In some way, God granted me the serenity, so that was my early experience with prayer, right? And you see things in your life that have an impression on you. One of the first jobs I got was a guy in rehab. His name was Chris Taylor, and he and I became good friends. And he did tile work. And he said, I know you don't have a job. I'm getting out of rehab. And he goes, I can give you a job for a little while. I got to do tile at my aunt's house. And we used to get driven up by my dad to his house. And I'd go in there, and he'd be kneeling by his bed on his knees praying. And I remember seeing, that's a humble act. Like, that's a surrender act, And he gets down on his knees to pray. So I decided I'm going to do that. And then he took me to his aunt's house, and it was Elizabeth Taylor's house. So I worked for Elizabeth Taylor my first few months of sobriety, and she was pretty newly sober, and it was really cool. But as a result, every morning I got out of bed and I got on my knees, and every night I went before I went to bed, I got on my knees. And I used to pray, but I don't think God is a being. I don't think he's anthropomorphic. I don't think he thinks like a human being. I don't think it's a he. If there is any justice at all, God is a woman. But I pray to what the Advaita Hindus call the timeless plenitude of being. And that's why I like to talk about grace, because that's my experience with God, the timeless plenitude of being. It's happening right now with us. I mean, it's growing your hair, it's beating your pulse, it's digesting your food, it's bringing thoughts into your head. If the sunlight hits your face and turns it into vitamin D, everything's a miracle, right? So I got on my knees and I pray. And so, I met this woman I told you about at a bus stop at the airport, and it turned out to be my wife. And my wife is stunningly beautiful. I mean, she really is by objective perspective. My wife is, my wife is so beautiful. When I brought her over to meet my parents and they found out she was from Wales, my dad just looked quizzically at her for the longest time. And then she left and he goes, "Son, does she need a green card?" And I'm like, "I don't know, why, Dad?" He thought, she can't really be that interested in you, but she was. We've been married a long time. But the first night that we had a very accelerated romance. She proposed to me after we'd been together 2 weeks, and I don't think she'd mind if I told you this. The second week of our dating, we went to a concert, and when I came home, I was at her house, and I kept trying to go because she had a class in the morning, and I kind of realized she doesn't want me to go. And I was standing on her porch, and I said, if you say one more word, I'm going to pick you up and carry you upstairs to your bedroom. And she looked at me and she said, "One more word." I just loved her for that. And I immediately regretted picking her up. I was like, "Gosh, yeah, this isn't easy, but I wanted to be, so I hustled her up the stairs, and she got up and she said, "I just need to go to the restroom for a minute." And I thought, I got to pray. I have not prayed now my whole sobriety. So she's in the restroom, so I kneel down as quickly as I can because I don't want to get caught. And she walks out right then. I'm kneeling by the side of the bed. And she's so cool. She put her arm up in the doorway and she goes, "Matthew, are you praying for that which I am about to receive?" I am very grateful. And I said, "Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I am." And I'll tell you, prayer, it does work. And that next day, she proposed to me. And we were married for 30 years, But then she had this stroke. My wife had this massive stroke. And it's so funny I get emotional about it. I'm not emotional about it. I'm around it all the time. But it's hard to talk about that time. Because it was so scary. And I feel like it was so unfair to her. And someone used a massager on her neck from Sharper Image, and it tore the interior wall of her carotid artery. And 6 hours later, she fell over in our house. And I told you that my sponsor, when I talked about the third step, he said, "You need to go to training in Chicago. We'll take care of your wife. We'll watch your wife." And I did. I went to training. I didn't tell you the epilogue of that story. I was smoking a cigar with my sponsor last year in the backyard of his house. He goes, "Hey, remember that time I told you to go to Chicago while Philippa was in ICU?" I go, "Yeah, I remember that time." And he goes, "I can't believe you did that." And I was like, "What the hell, Bill? I thought, what? But what I didn't say is I was away for 4 weeks, and my wife was in the hospital for 5 weeks. And I couldn't take it after 2 weeks. I was so superstitious, I didn't take my clothes off at night when I was in training because I felt like that would be giving up. These weird things, I don't know why I thought that, but I thought, if I put my pajamas on and get into bed, I've resigned myself, and she'll die while I'm not home. So I slept in my clothes. People left messages like, "Hey, we took your wife food today. Hey, we wrapped your Christmas presents today. Hey, I hope you don't mind, but we bought you guys a Christmas tree." I had so much love and support, but I couldn't stand being away. So on a Friday night, my second week, it was a Friday afternoon, I walked over to the airport. We were right across the airport. And I walked up and called some of my friends at different airlines, and they left a ticket for me, and I flew home. I snuck away. because they didn't need us on the weekends. And the airport I landed was near the UC Irvine Medical Center. But I didn't get to Pitt till around 10 o'clock at night. And they dropped me off. I had nothing. I didn't have anything with me. And I had friends calling me like, hey, she looks really good. She's doing really well. And I walked into her hospital room, and that was not true. She was very badly hurt. And her eyes were crossed, and she didn't look right. She's better now, but it was really startling. And I walked up, and I knew I couldn't show the fear in my face. And she was so happy to see me. And then the nurses came in and like, who are you? And I'm like, I'm her husband. They go, we've been wondering about you. You know, I want to say this, 78 people visited my wife from Alcoholics Anonymous. Not 8 people 10 times. 78 different individuals signed that book. Mostly men, because I go to men's stags, and she said her physical therapist was an Iranian guy, and he goes, are you a madam? Like, why do all these men come? But anyway, she looked up at me, and she was very distorted and hurt, and she couldn't move. And so I just crawled into bed with her. I didn't know what to do. So I put my arms around her, and she fell asleep, and then I fell asleep. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I woke up like I sat straight up out of bed, and my heart was pounding. And I had terror, like not fear, like internal terror. I didn't know how I could do this. I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old and a job I didn't think I could do in cardiovascular medicine. And I was so afraid. I just felt like so small and so alone. And I got out of bed and I didn't look at Pip, and I walked up, and on the chair next to the door they had put shampoo and toothpaste and stuff, because I told them I just got on an airplane, I don't have any luggage, and I'm not leaving. It's against the rules to spend the night in ICU. But they could see me. I was not leaving. So I walked down the hallway and I found this big shower. If you've ever been in ICU at night, it's not comforting. It's very alienating. It's very raw. And it's dark, and people are moaning, and people are dying. And I went into this big, big shower. It was like this shower from that movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was this big orthopedic, and nothing was comforting. And I remember when I was taking my clothes off and I turned the water on, that my grand sponsor had once said, pray with the intention that you know your prayers are being answered. So I did. I got down on my knees under that water, and I said, God, I know I'm not supposed to pray, thank you. I'm not supposed to pray for this, but I need some power. I can't do this job. I wish I could do this, but I'm not the guy for this, and I don't know what to do, and I need your help. And it was such an intentional, such a sincere prayer. And I stood up, and nothing had changed. I was full of fear. I dried off. I got my clothes on, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but I stayed in the shower for a little while. Because I couldn't look at it. And finally I got my courage up, and I walked down the hall. And I walked in, and I didn't look at her right away, but I knew she was asleep. And next to her bed was a leather chair that faced out the door. So I turned and I sat down in the chair, and then I saw the nurses station ICU, and I just closed my eyes because I couldn't be in this place. And almost instantly, I said, I can feel Pip. I can tell she's in the room. Like I can feel her. And I thought, I wonder if that's like a sixth sense of love. You know, you can feel somebody you really love. And I just academically thought, if I went into a house, a big old house, and I was blind, I bet I could find her. I had these random thoughts. So I finally got up, enough courage to stand up, and I put my hands on the bars next to her bed, and I couldn't look at her, and I looked out the window, and it was a big picture window, and UC Irvine is in Irvine, Orange County, and it's a very beautiful campus, but I couldn't see that it was dark, and it just barely sunrise, and there were these big blotches, and I was leaning forward because they were moving. So I was taken off guard, and I looked closer, and I realized it was trees, and there were little birds, like jumping around in the trees, and just very innocently, like before I needed to be restored, like when I was a child connected to God, just very innocently I went, God, the world is so beautiful. It just hit me. And then I accidentally looked at my wife, who has this pale Welsh skin, and she was glowing. She was sleeping, but she was glowing. And I thought, God, I love this woman. And there was no fear. It was gone. And the reason I went to all those pains to tell you that story is because I have prayed many times over the years. And prayer has never changed my circumstances. But almost 100% of the time, prayer has changed my perception of my circumstances so I could act in a courageous way. And that's what I wanted to say about prayer. And now I want to talk about meditation. You know, meditation is something that I think is very undervalued with people in recovery. You know, in my home group, we say, hey, the 11th step, it's not extra credit, right? Because people are like, oh, I work with others, I do this, I do that. Oh, what's your prayer and meditation look like? I sponsor 5 guys, you know, it's like we ignore that. And how many here meditate regularly? Good. So normally I would say, so about half of you that raised your hand, because I'm cynical, right? But good. So you learn things about meditation, right? And I brought this up the other day. It's like one of the things you learn about meditation is when you try to sit still and be quiet, you're just inundated with thoughts, right? And I want to say why I value meditation so much. Because it's become clear to me over the years that once I had restored to health physically, once I started restoring my life through the steps of the amends and showing up and doing a 5th step, there was something really missing in me. And what I learned about meditation is that there is a space inside me that I can access. It's inside all of us. In fact, part of the Advaita Hinduism that I talked about with the timeless plenitude of being is it said everyone ultimately is just presence awareness. And that means we're really not different. Deep down inside, you're not a man or a woman. You're not a liberal or a conservative. You're not a truck driver or a housewife. You're presence awareness. That's what we all are, right? And thank you. I usually come prepared. I appreciate that. But so I want to talk about some of the misconceptions I've learned about meditation. When I talk to people about meditation, they often say, like, I can't do it. My mind won't be still, right? And I understand that. I understand that thought because you misperceive meditation. You think people think meditation is sitting there and being perfectly still and having no thoughts. And long ago, years and years ago, when I worked at a bookstore, long before I got sober and I was getting this religious studies degree by accident, there was a Buddhist magazine at a bookstore I worked with called Tricycle. It's still going on now. And there was a talk about meditation from a Zen master. And he said, people in the West don't understand meditation at all. They think meditation is when you actually are just focused on your breath or just focused on your mantra. And he said, that's not meditation. Meditation is an exercise. The exercise is when you get distracted from your breath or your mantra or whatever you're meditating on, which will always happen. It happens to every meditator. It's when you notice it and you come back to the stillness. Meditation is building the muscle of returning to the stillness. In other words, for me, meditation is devaluing my compulsive mind. The best example I heard of it was my friend Brooks. We have this guy Brooks, and he has Brooks-isms, right? Like he says things. One of them is, I meditate today, so someday in the future I'll be in the present moment. I love Brooks. He also says, I'm willing to turn my will and my life over to the care of God because I think God's going to give me everything I ever wanted. But Brooks said one time, like the TV's on. This is your brain. The TV's on in the living room, right? And it's loud. And you're walking around the house and it's mostly noise. It's mostly nothing. And then you walk by and they'll say, hey, your mother's birthday's tomorrow. And you go, oh, that's important. And you kind of hang out in the living room closer to the noisy TV. And then after a while he goes, don't forget to do your taxes. 90% noise, 10% sort of valuable stuff. He goes, and then we all end up with our face pressed against the TV. And we don't even know we're in a big empty house. And he said, what meditation does, it doesn't shut the TV off. It turns the TV down. And I have found over the years that my conscience whispers. And I think my conscience whispers because the truth does not need to be loud. The truth doesn't care what you think of it. It's not trying to make a point. My still, quiet voice inside me is quiet. And I heard somebody in a conversation the other day saying, as you get sober longer, that gets louder. I don't think so. I think I get quieter. And then I can hear it. And so what happened to me, to be totally honest, is I was having these problems. I was really busy. I got promoted in my work. The kids were getting older. And I was at a meeting, and it was an 11-step meeting. And my grand sponsor's wife, Adele, walked by. And she goes, how you doing, darling? Adele was just a love bomb, right? She goes, how you doing, darling? And I go, I don't think I'm that well, honestly. She goes, oh, what's going on? I go, well, I got this big job now, and I'm spread real thin, and I don't feel like I'm being a good husband or a good father, and I was I feel odd, I feel empty inside. And she goes, oh, how much are you meditating? And I go, well, to be honest, I'm not meditating at all. And she goes, oh, double that. And I just love her for that. She didn't go, what's wrong with you? It's not executive. She went, do twice as much as nothing. And she slid it off. And then I'm sitting there, and it became really clear to me, like, I have someone in my life who criticizes me all the time. I have someone in my life who fills me with worry. I have someone in my life who fills me with regret and anger. And it's me. I'm the loudest critical voice that I carry around in my life. Most people are very kind to me. And Jay walks up and he goes, hey, what's going on? Adele's husband. And I go, I'm not doing that great. He goes, oh, why not? I go, I got this big job, and I'm not a good husband, I'm not a good... He goes, wow, how can I help you? Which is one of the things I love about Jay. He always asks that. I said, well, Adele says I should meditate more. And he goes, okay, what time do you get up? And since Pip's stroke, I get up at 5. So I get up at 5, and he goes, oh, how about I call you at 6? And I go, you're going to call me? And he goes, well, why don't I just call you, and we'll meditate for 5 minutes. He goes, be good for you, be good for me. I go, okay. So he called me the next day, 6 o'clock in the morning. I picked up, hey, it's Jay. Hey, Jay, he goes, I'm going to set a little timer here. I go, okay. We sat in stillness and silence, and I practiced that muscle of being distracted and coming back to the stillness, deprioritizing my compulsive, critical voice. And then after a while, he did this many days in a row, 5 minutes became stupid. It was like kid stuff. So we did 10 minutes. And then after a few weeks, he's like, you want to go for 20? And then we got up to 30 minutes. Every day, he'd call. Nobody else was up in the house, so I could do this with a clear conscience. And we'd meditate for 30 minutes, and then he'd say, I love you. And I'd say, I love you, Jay, and he'd hang up. And then after a while, somebody at a meeting goes, I heard you and Jay are meditating every morning. And that's right, we're badasses. We're spiritual badasses. And he goes, can I join you? And I said, sure. So we got a little conference call. That was 23 years ago. We have 78 people on that call. Jay doesn't come anymore. Because he's transcended me. But I told you that because I wanted to be clear. I didn't get serious about meditation. Meditation got serious about me. And I had to get up and do it because I am the keeper of the conference call. Being away for 10 days, I'm getting all these texts like, where are you? I got somebody else, Carla Rowell, is doing it while I'm not there. But it's a beautiful thing. One person, I pick people and they get on and they read a paragraph or a poem or a prayer. Then we sit in silence for 20 minutes, which is what I do now, is transcendental meditation. And then the bell rings and we have 2 minutes to come out of our meditation. Then 3 bells ring and we all say thank you and we hang up. Right? So what's the result of this? It's hard to see if you're around me. I'm a compulsive talker. I think too fast. I want to be in 6 places at once. But I'm so much better than I used to be. And I want to tell you like a really concrete thing. Meditating every day for 22 years A few years ago, we lived in Washington, and we were about to move back. And I have a son who is a really beautiful man, but he's a really sensitive guy. And he suffered from anxiety and depression. And what happened was, a week before we were supposed to move, we got a call from a psych ward that our son had checked himself in under suicide watch. Now, I'm a man who was raised in the Catholic Church, and immediately I'm going to say I was a terrible father. I somehow did something to make this boy this screwed up. I didn't pay enough attention, I traveled too much, whatever. But I meditate every day. And I deprioritize my critical mind and get to the stillness that is my birthright. That is the presence awareness of who I am. And that mental hospital was 2 hours from our house. And I went every single day for 7 days. And I did not, for 2 hours, think about what a bad dad I was. That's what my old self would have done. What I did is I drove for 2 hours and thought, what does he need when I get there? And for a while, I went through all the changes. Well, he needs really good advice, or maybe he needs money. And then by the time I get there, it was real clear to me. He needs my presence. That's all. And I went in there, and he'd shaved his head. He was going through all these problems. And I looked at him, and I just sat with him. And we sat knee to knee, and they only let you visit for half an hour. And he didn't say a word. And I didn't say a word. And I left. The next day I went up there, I sat next to him. The third day I went up there, he fell into my arms and sobbed. And the seventh day I went up there and I busted him out. They were trying to keep him, and I said, I got better plans for him, and I got him out and got him into good therapy. And you know what changed my son's life? As I taught him transcendental meditation, he doesn't have anxiety anymore. He quit smoking immediately. And now he teaches other people how to do it. You cannot devalue what regular meditation can do for you. And the little timing Nazi guy just gave me the 5 minutes. So I'm gonna just wrap up with this. I like the spiritual teacher, Anthony DeMello. And I think it was him. He said, you get as much God as you make room for. He said, if you bring a thimble down to the spiritual lake, you will get a thimble full of spiritual water. And if you bring a bucket down to that lake, you will get a bucket full of water. And if you bring a pool down to that lake, you will get a pool full of spiritual water. And I'm here to tell you, you can really just dive in. Thanks a lot.